The great hall of the Aethorian Empire was filled with silence. Thousands of faces looked down from the curved balconies that rose toward the golden ceiling. Every noble family had sent their representatives. Every military commander stood at attention. And in the center of it all, Princess Valera knelt on the cold stone floor, her silver hair falling around her face like a curtain of shame. Her father, Emperor Zaltharon, sat on his throne above her. His skin was pale blue, like all Aethorians, and his eyes were the color of dying stars. He had ruled for 3,000 years. He had never shown mercy to anyone, not even his own daughter. "You have spoken against the will of the Empire," he said, his voice echoing through the hall. "You have called for peace with the humans. You have questioned the sacred war that protects our civilization." Valera did not look up. She had known this moment was coming. For months, she had spoken in private meetings, trying to convince the Council that the war with Earth was wrong. She had seen the reports from the front lines. She had read the intelligence files. Humans were not the mindless savages her people claimed them to be. They had art, science, medicine, and love. They had built civilizations from nothing. They had walked on their own moon before they had even discovered faster-than-light travel. But her words had fallen on deaf ears, and now someone had reported her to her father. "The punishment for treason is death," the Emperor continued. "But you are my daughter. My blood runs in your veins. I cannot kill you without bringing shame upon my house." Valera felt a small spark of hope. Perhaps she would only be imprisoned. Perhaps she would be sent to one of the outer colonies, where she could live quietly until this madness ended. Instead, her father said, "You will be sent to Earth. You will marry a human." The hall erupted in gasps and whispers. Valera's head snapped up, her violet eyes wide with shock. Marry a human? It was unthinkable. Aethorians lived for 10,000 years or more. Humans barely lasted a century. To her people, humans were like insects, brief and meaningless. A marriage to one was not just punishment. It was designed to erase her completely from Aethorian society. "You will live among them," her father continued, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "You will share a home with one of their soldiers. You will see for yourself what these creatures truly are. And when your human husband dies of old age in a few decades, perhaps you will finally understand why we must destroy them." Valera wanted to scream. She wanted to fight. But guards were already moving toward her, their energy weapons humming. She was lifted to her feet and dragged from the hall, while her father watched with cold satisfaction. 3 days later, she was on a transport ship heading toward Earth. The journey took 2 weeks. Valera spent most of it alone in her small cabin, staring out at the stars. She thought about everything she had lost: her home, her family, her future. She had been one of the most powerful women in the galaxy. Now she was nothing more than a political prisoner being shipped to a primitive world. When the ship entered Earth's atmosphere, Valera pressed her face against the window. She had expected a barren wasteland, a planet stripped of resources and covered in the scars of human violence. Instead, she saw blue oceans that sparkled in the sunlight. She saw green forests that stretched for thousands of miles. She saw white clouds drifting over mountains and deserts and cities that glowed with light. It was beautiful. She hated herself for thinking so. The ship landed at a spaceport in a region called North America. Valera was escorted down the ramp by 2 Aethorian guards, who would return home as soon as she was delivered. They walked through crowds of humans who stopped and stared. Some looked curious. Others looked afraid. A few looked angry. Valera kept her head high. She would not let these creatures see her weakness. At the end of the landing platform, a man was waiting alone. He was tall for a human, with broad shoulders, and brown hair that was cut short in a military style. His eyes were green, the color of Earth's forests, and his face was weathered by sun and wind. He wore simple clothes, not a uniform, and he held no weapons. He just stood there, his hands in his pockets, watching her approach. "Princess Valera," he said when she reached him. His voice was calm and quiet. "I'm Connor Hayes. I guess I'm your husband now." The Aethorian guards released her arms and stepped back. One of them handed Connor a small data pad containing the marriage contract. He glanced at it, then tucked it under his arm without reading it. "Welcome to Earth," he said. "I know you don't want to be here. Neither do I. But we can at least be civil to each other." Valera stared at him. She had expected anger. She had expected demands. She had expected the kind of brutal dominance that her people claimed all humans possessed. Instead, this man spoke to her like she was a person, not a prize. "I have a house about 3 hours from here," Connor continued. "It's quiet, plenty of space. You'll have your own room. I won't bother you unless you want company." He turned and started walking toward a small vehicle parked nearby. Valera hesitated, then followed him. She had no other choice. The drive took them through landscapes unlike anything she had ever seen. Rolling hills covered in golden grass. Small towns with wooden buildings and friendly signs. Mountains in the distance, their peaks white with snow. And everywhere, humans going about their simple lives, unaware that an alien princess was passing through their world. Connor barely spoke during the journey. He played soft music on the vehicle's speakers, songs with gentle voices and acoustic instruments. When Valera asked what they were, he said, "Old stuff, folk music. My mother used to play it when I was a kid." The house was small by Aethorian standards, but it sat on several acres of land, surrounded by trees and fields. There was a barn with animals, a garden with vegetables, and a porch with wooden chairs facing the sunset. Connor showed her to her room. It was simple but clean, with a window that looked out over the mountains. "Bathrooms down the hall," he said. "Kitchen's always open. I'll make dinner in a couple hours if you're hungry." Then he left her alone. Valera stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by silence. She was on an alien world, married to a stranger, cut off from everything she had ever known. She should have felt angry. She should have felt afraid. Instead, for reasons she could not explain, she felt something else. She felt curious. The first month was difficult. Valera kept to herself, spending most of her time in her room or walking through the fields around the house. She did not speak to Connor unless she had to. She did not eat his food. She survived on the Aethorian supply drops that arrived once a week, packages of nutrient paste and preserved meals from her homeworld. Connor did not seem bothered by her silence. He woke early each morning and worked on the farm. He fixed fences, fed the animals, and tended to his garden. In the evenings, he sat on the porch and read books made of actual paper, turning the pages slowly as the sun went down. Valera watched him through her window. She could not understand why he lived this way. He had been a soldier, a captain in the Terran military with commendations and honors. He could have lived in a city, surrounded by technology and comfort. Instead, he chose to dig in the dirt and care for animals that served no strategic purpose. One evening, she finally asked him, "Why do you do this?" she said, standing in the doorway of the barn. Connor was brushing one of his horses, a large brown creature that seemed to enjoy the attention. "This is inefficient. You could use machines. You could have servants." Connor looked up at her, surprised that she was speaking to him. Then he smiled, a small and genuine expression that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. "It makes me feel connected to something real," he said. "When I was in the war, everything was about destruction, weapons, tactics, death. I got tired of it. Out here, I can build things, grow things. It reminds me that humans can do more than just fight." Valera did not know how to respond. She had been taught that humans were violent by nature, that they lived for conflict and conquest. Yet here was a man who had chosen peace, even when war had been his profession. She started spending more time outside her room. At first, she just observed. She watched Connor work, and listened when he talked to himself, or to the animals. She learned the names of the horses, and the dog that followed him everywhere, a loyal creature called Max, who had only one eye and a crooked tail. She learned that Connor sang when he thought no one was listening, old songs about love and loss and hope. Then, one morning, Connor handed her a cup of something hot and dark. "Coffee," he said. "It's bitter, but most humans can't start the day without it. Figured you might want to try." Valera took the cup carefully. The smell was strange, earthy and strong. She took a small sip and made a face. It was terrible. It was the first time she had heard him laugh, and the sound was warm and kind. Nothing like the cold laughter of the Aethorian court. "Takes some getting used to," he admitted. "Here, try this instead." He poured her a different drink, something golden and sweet, that tasted like sunshine and flowers. She finished the entire cup. "What is this?" she asked. "Apple juice," he said, "from the trees out back. I pressed it myself last fall." After that, they started having breakfast together. The conversations were short at first, just simple exchanges about the weather or the farm, but slowly they grew longer. Connor told her about his childhood in a small town, about his parents who had died when he was young, about his sister who lived on the other side of the planet with her husband and children. He told her about the war, though he spoke of it quietly and with obvious pain. "I've killed people," he said one evening, staring at the fire he had built in the living room. "Aethorians, mostly. Soldiers who were trying to kill me and my crew. I don't regret defending myself, but I regret that it was necessary. Every time I pulled the trigger, I wondered if there was another way." Valera sat across from him, wrapped in a blanket he had given her. She did not know what to say. In the Empire, soldiers were celebrated for their kills. The more enemies they destroyed, the more glory they earned. But Connor spoke of violence like it was a wound that had never healed. "Your people think we're monsters," he continued. "Maybe some of us are, but most of us are just trying to protect the people we love." That night, Valera could not sleep. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything she had been taught about humans. They were dangerous. They were a threat that needed to be eliminated before they spread across the galaxy. But Connor was none of those things. He was patient and kind. He worked hard and asked for nothing in return. He had every reason to hate her, to treat her like the enemy she was supposed to be. Instead, he treated her like a guest in his home. Maybe, she thought, everything I know is wrong. The next day, she helped him in the garden. Her hands got dirty for the first time in her life, and she found that she did not mind. Connor showed her how to plant seeds and water the soil, how to recognize weeds and remove them without harming the good plants. He answered every question she asked, no matter how simple. "Why do you grow your own food?" she asked. "You could buy it from the stores." "Because there's something special about eating something you grew yourself. It tastes better when you've worked for it." Valera thought about the food in the Aethorian palace, perfectly synthesized and completely identical every time. She thought about the nutrient paste she had been surviving on since her arrival, and she realized that she had never once wondered where her food came from. That evening, Connor made dinner using vegetables from the garden. The meal was simple, just roasted vegetables with some kind of grain. But it was the most delicious thing Valera had ever tasted. She ate until she was full, something she had never done in all her centuries of life. "Thank you," she said when she was finished. "This was wonderful." Connor smiled. "You're welcome. There's more if you want it." For the first time since her arrival, Valera smiled back. She did not know it yet, but she was beginning to change. The lies she had believed her whole life were starting to crack, and through those cracks, something new was beginning to grow. Something that felt dangerously like hope. 6 months had passed since Valera arrived on Earth, and she had become a different person. She wore human clothes now, simple things made of cotton and wool that felt soft against her skin. She helped with the farm every day, feeding the animals and working in the garden. She had learned to cook human food, though Connor still did most of the cooking, and she had started to think of the small farmhouse as her home. But she had not forgotten who she was or where she came from. Every night, she checked her personal communicator for messages from the Empire. Most were propaganda broadcasts about the glorious war against humanity. Some were updates about political changes in the court. None were meant for her. She had been forgotten, just as her father intended. Then, one night, a different kind of message arrived. It was encrypted with a code that only members of the royal family knew. Valera opened it with trembling fingers, and her sister's face appeared on the small screen. Ilara was younger than Valera by several centuries, with the same silver hair and violet eyes. But her face was pale and frightened, her eyes darting around as if she expected someone to burst through the door at any moment. "Sister," Ilara whispered, "I don't have much time. I've found something terrible. You need to see this." The message contained files, hundreds of them, all stolen from the Imperial Archive. Valera spent the entire night reading them, and with each page, her horror grew. The war with humanity had not started because humans were aggressors. The Empire had lied about everything. The first attacks had been against human colonies on the outer edges of explored space, peaceful settlements with no military value. Aethorian ships had destroyed them completely, killing thousands of innocent people. Then the Empire had jammed all communication signals and blamed the destruction on human expansion. They had told their own people that humans had attacked first, that the war was defensive and necessary. But that was not the worst part. The files contained research reports about humanity going back thousands of years. The Empire had been watching humans since before they had discovered fire. They had studied human technology, human culture, human biology. They knew everything about them, from their history of wars to their greatest works of art. And they were afraid. The reports described humans as the most dangerous species the Empire had ever encountered. Not because they were violent, though they could be. Not because they were aggressive, though they sometimes were. But because they were adaptable. They evolved too quickly. They learned too fast. They had achieved, in 10,000 years, what the Aethorians had taken millions of years to accomplish. The Empire had ruled the galaxy for ages, because no other species could challenge them. But humans could. Given enough time, humans would surpass them, and that terrified the ancient rulers of the Aethorian homeworld. The final files in the package made Valera feel sick. They were plans for something called the Purification Protocol. It was a secret project to sterilize Earth completely, using a biological weapon that would kill every human being on the planet while leaving the infrastructure intact. The Empire did not want to conquer humanity, they wanted to erase them from existence. And the project was already in its final stages. Valera sat in the darkness of her room, the communicator clutched in her hands. Everything she had believed was a lie. Her people were not defenders of civilization. They were murderers. They had started a war based on fear and propaganda, and now they were planning genocide. She thought about Connor, sleeping peacefully in his room down the hall. She thought about the people she had seen in the towns they sometimes visited, going about their lives with no idea that an entire civilization was planning to kill them. She thought about the children she had watched playing in parks, their laughter filling the air like music. They all had to die because her people were afraid of what humans might become. No, she thought, I won't let this happen. She went to Connor's room and woke him up. He looked at her with confused eyes, still half asleep, but when he saw her expression, he sat up immediately. What's wrong? He asked. Valera showed him everything. She translated the documents, explained the codes, answered his questions as best she could. Connor read the files in silence, his face growing darker with each page. When he finished, he sat very still for a long time. Valera waited for his anger. She waited for him to blame her, to see her as part of the conspiracy that had killed so many of his people. She was prepared for hatred. She deserved it. Instead, Connor looked at her with those green eyes that reminded her of Earth's forests, and he asked a simple question. What do you want to do about it? She blinked. What? You didn't have to show me this, he said. You could have kept quiet. You could have let it happen and returned to your people when it was over. But you didn't. So I'm asking you, what do you want to do? Valera felt tears forming in her eyes. She had not cried since she was a child, centuries ago. Aethorians did not cry. It was considered a weakness. But now, faced with this human who offered her trust instead of blame, she could not stop them. I want to stop it, she whispered. I want to tell everyone the truth. Connor nodded slowly. He reached out and took her hand, the first time he had ever touched her. His skin was warm and rough from years of work. Then we will, he said. Together. In that moment, something changed between them. They were no longer strangers forced together by politics. They were partners, united by a shared purpose. And Valera knew deep in her heart that she would do whatever it took to protect this world and the people who had shown her what truth and kindness really meant. The days that followed were the most intense of Valera's long life. She and Connor worked constantly, barely sleeping, turning their quiet farmhouse into a center of resistance against the most powerful empire in the galaxy. Connor contacted his old military friends first. Most of them were retired now, scattered across Earth and the human colonies, but they still trusted him. When he told them what he had learned, they believed him. More importantly, they wanted to help. The most important ally was a woman named Grace Whitmore. She was an admiral in the Terran Alliance fleet, one of the highest-ranking officers in human space. She was also Connor's former commander, the woman who had trained him and given him his first command. Admiral Whitmore had lost her only son in the early attacks of the war. For years, she had carried that grief like a stone in her heart, hating the Aethorians with every fiber of her being. When Connor told her that he needed to bring an Aethorian princess to meet her, she almost refused. But Grace Whitmore had not become an admiral by making emotional decisions. She agreed to listen. They met at a small military base in the desert. Valera was nervous as they approached, surrounded by human soldiers who watched her with suspicious eyes. She was the enemy, a member of the species that had killed their friends and family. If they decided to shoot her, no one would blame them. But Connor walked beside her, his hand on her shoulder, and she drew strength from his presence. Admiral Whitmore was waiting in a secure room. She was an older woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight braid, and eyes that had seen too many battles. She did not stand when Valera entered. She did not offer any greeting. "Show me," she said simply. Valera connected her communicator to the room's display system and projected the stolen files. She explained everything, translating the Aethorian text and answering the Admiral's sharp questions. She held nothing back, not even the details that made her own people look like monsters. When the presentation was finished, Admiral Whitmore sat in silence for a long time. Her face was unreadable, carved from stone. Then she looked at Valera with those hard eyes. "Why should I believe you?" she asked. "This could be a trick. You could be a spy sent to give us false information." "I could be," Valera admitted, "but I'm not. I came here as a prisoner, forced to marry a human as punishment for wanting peace. I expected to find savages. Instead, I found people who are brave and kind and full of life. Your species has done nothing to deserve what my people are planning. I refuse to be part of it." The Admiral studied her for another long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. "I believe you," she said. "God help me, I believe you." From that point on, the resistance grew quickly. Admiral Whitmore used her position to quietly prepare the human fleet for the truth. She gathered loyal officers who could be trusted, people who would not panic when they learned how close they were to extinction. Meanwhile, Valera reached out to her own people. Using her royal codes, she contacted Aethorians who she suspected might be sympathetic to her cause, scientists who had spoken privately against the war, diplomats who had tried to negotiate peace, soldiers who had seen the destruction and been disturbed by it. She found more allies than she expected. The Empire's lies had created cracks everywhere, and those cracks were full of people who were tired of the killing. One of her most important contacts was a scientist named Toreth, an old friend of her mother, who had helped develop the biological weapon at the center of the purification protocol. He had been forced to work on the project against his will, threatened with the death of his family if he refused. When Valera contacted him, he wept with relief. "I will give you everything," he said. "The formulas, the deployment schedules, the weaknesses. I will help you stop this nightmare." The plan came together slowly. They would not try to defeat the Empire with military force. Humanity was strong, but they could not win a direct war against such an ancient power. Instead, they would fight with the truth. They would broadcast the stolen files across every communication frequency in the galaxy. Every Aethorian citizen would see the evidence of their government's lies. Every human would know the true history of the war. The Empire's power rested on its control of information. When that control was broken, everything would change. But first, they had to survive long enough to make the broadcast. His spies were everywhere, watching for any sign of rebellion. When they detected unusual communication patterns from Earth, he sent assassins to deal with the problem. They came at night, 3 Aethorian warriors in black armor that bent light around them, making them nearly invisible. They slipped past the human security patrols and approached the farmhouse, where Valera and Connor were preparing the final stages of their plan. Connor noticed them first. He had the instincts of a soldier, even after years of peace, and something about the shadows near the barn caught his attention. He grabbed his weapon and told Valera to hide. "Stay in the basement," he said. "Lock the door. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe." "I'm not leaving you," she protested. "You have to survive," he said, his eyes fierce. "You're the only one who can make this work. Without you, we all die. Please, Valera, trust me." She did trust him. She went to the basement and locked the door, listening to the sounds of violence above her. The fight was brutal. Connor was older and slower than the assassins, but he knew the terrain, and he fought with the desperation of a man protecting everything he loved. He killed the first assassin with a trap he had set near the barn, a hidden explosive that detonated when the warrior stepped on the wrong board. He killed the second in hand-to-hand combat, using techniques he had learned in the war and a knife he kept hidden in his boot. The third assassin was the most dangerous. She was fast and skilled, and she nearly succeeded in her mission. She found the entrance to the basement and was about to break down the door when Connor caught her from behind. They fought in the darkness, crashing through furniture and walls, until Connor finally managed to grab her and throw her through a window. When Valera finally emerged from the basement, she found Connor sitting on the porch, covered in blood. Most of it was not his, but some of it was. He had deep cuts on his arms, and a wound on his side that would need medical attention. "Are you okay?" she asked, rushing to his side. He looked up at her and smiled weakly. "I'll live. Are you hurt?" "No," she said. "Because of you. You saved me." She knelt beside him, pressing cloth against his wounds to stop the bleeding. Her hands were shaking, and she realized that she was more afraid than she had ever been in her life. Not for herself, but for him. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you risk your life for me? I'm not your real wife. This marriage was forced on both of us." Connor reached up and touched her face gently. His fingers left a streak of blood on her cheek, but she did not care. "You are my wife," he said. "That means something to me, even if it didn't start out that way." Valera looked into his eyes, and she understood something that had been growing inside her for months. She loved him. This strange, stubborn, beautiful human had become the most important person in her life, and she would do anything to protect him, just as he had done for her. "I love you," she whispered. Connor smiled. "I love you too. Now help me stop this bleeding before I ruin the furniture." Despite everything, she laughed. The broadcast went out on the anniversary of the first attack, the day the Aethorian Empire celebrated the beginning of its righteous war against humanity. It was a day of parades and speeches, when citizens gathered to honor their brave soldiers and curse the savage humans who threatened their civilization. This year, the celebration was interrupted. Every screen across 100 Aethorian worlds flickered at the same moment. The propaganda broadcast disappeared, replaced by a face that many recognized. Princess Valera, the disgraced daughter of the Emperor, looked into the cameras with steady eyes. "My name is Valera of House Zaltharon," she said. "I am speaking to you from Earth, the planet you have been taught to hate. Everything you have been told about this world is a lie, and I have proof." The files appeared on every screen, documents written by the highest officials in the Empire. Plans for the first attacks on human colonies, orders to jam communication signals so no one could call for help. Reports celebrating the successful destruction of innocent settlements. The citizens watched in stunned silence as their entire understanding of the war collapsed. Then came the research files, centuries of studies showing that humanity was not primitive or savage, but brilliant and adaptable. Images of human art and architecture, recordings of human music that moved even the coldest Aethorian hearts. Evidence that the Empire had known the truth about humans from the very beginning and had chosen to lie anyway. Finally, the Purification Protocol, the plans to release a biological weapon that would kill every human being on Earth. The schedules, the deployment methods, the cold calculations of how long it would take for the entire species to die. "This is what our empire has become," Valera said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Murderers, liars, cowards who are so afraid of what humans might achieve that they are willing to commit genocide to stop them. I was raised to believe we were the greatest civilization in the galaxy. Now I know the truth. We are monsters, hiding behind pretty speeches and ancient traditions." She paused, gathering herself. "But we don't have to be," she continued. "I have lived among humans for almost a year. I have seen their kindness and their courage. I have watched them build and create and love with a passion that puts us to shame. They are not our enemies. They could be our greatest friends, if we only give them the chance." The broadcast ended, but its effects had just begun. On the Aethorian homeworld, crowds gathered in the streets. Some demanded answers from their government. Others refused to believe what they had seen, insisting it was human propaganda. But many stood in silence, tears running down their faces, finally understanding the horror that had been done in their name. The military was divided. Some commanders wanted to accelerate the Purification Protocol, to finish what they had started, before humanity could respond. But others refused. Soldiers who had spent their lives following orders suddenly found that they could not follow these ones. Ships that had been preparing to deploy the biological weapon turned away from Earth and refused to continue. Within weeks the Empire began to fracture. Emperor Zaltharon tried to maintain control. He ordered the arrest of anyone who questioned the war. He sent loyal troops to crush the protests. He declared his daughter a traitor and offered a massive reward for her capture, dead or alive. But it was too late. The truth had spread too far. The cracks in the foundation of the Empire had become chasms that could not be repaired. The final blow came from the Imperial Council itself. The same nobles who had watched Valera kneel in shame now turned against her father. They had seen the evidence. They had heard the voices of their own people demanding change, and they knew that if they continued down this path, everything would be lost. Emperor Zaltharon was arrested by his own guards and removed from the throne he had occupied for 3,000 years. He was not executed. That would have been too merciful. Instead, he was imprisoned in a small cell on a distant moon, where he would spend the rest of his long life, knowing that his daughter had defeated him. The war ended not with a great battle, but with a collective choice. Both sides put down their weapons and agreed to talk. Valera was offered the throne. She was the obvious choice, the princess who had risked everything to tell the truth. The people loved her. The council respected her. She could have ruled an empire. She refused. "I was a princess who knew nothing," she told the new Provisional Council. "I was blind to the crimes of my own people. Let someone wiser lead. Let someone who has earned the right through wisdom and service, not through blood. I have a life somewhere else now, a real one." She returned to Earth, to the farmhouse in Montana, to Connor. He was waiting for her on the porch when she arrived, sitting in his favorite chair with Max sleeping at his feet. His wounds had healed, though he would carry scars for the rest of his life. He stood when he saw her, his eyes shining with relief and joy. "Welcome home," he said. Valera ran to him and threw her arms around him. She held him tightly, breathing in his familiar scent, feeling his heart beat against her chest. She had traveled across the galaxy and helped end a war, but this was where she belonged. This was home. "I missed you," she whispered. "I missed you too," he said. "Now come inside. Dinner's almost ready." They ate together as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. They talked about small things, the garden and the animals and the repairs that needed to be done on the barn. They talked about big things too, the peace negotiations and the new government and the future that was finally possible for both their peoples. When the meal was finished, Connor reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside was a ring, simple and handmade, carved from the wood of an apple tree that grew behind the house. "I know Aethorians don't do this," he said, his voice uncertain for the first time since she had known him. "But I wanted you to know that I'd choose you. Not because of treaties or politics, not because we were forced together, just because of you. Because you're the bravest and most wonderful person I've ever met. Because I love you, Valera. I really, truly love you." Valera looked at the ring, then at the man who had shown her what humanity really was. He was not a soldier anymore. He was not a political tool or a punishment. He was just Connor, the man who grew apples and sang old songs, and fought like a demon to protect the people he cared about. She took the ring and put it on her finger. "I choose you too," she said. Years passed. The peace between humans and Aethorians grew stronger. Trade flourished. Cultural exchanges began. Children of both species grew up learning each other's languages and histories, building a future that neither had thought possible. When the first joint Human Aethorian Academy opened, Valera was invited to speak at the ceremony. She stood before thousands of young beings, human and Aethorian alike, and told them her story. "I was taught that humans were lesser," she said, "primitive, dangerous. I was sent to live among them as punishment. But what I found was a people who build when they could destroy, who forgive when they could hate, and who love with a fire that burns brighter for being brief. They do not live long, but they live fully. And in my short years with them I have learned more about courage and hope than in my centuries before." She looked at Connor in the crowd. He was older now, gray at his temples, lines around his eyes, but he was still watching her like she was the most wonderful thing he had ever seen. "Humanity didn't conquer me," she finished. "They simply showed me who I wanted to become. Humans and Aethorians together, celebrating a future that had seemed impossible just a few years before." And in the crowd, Connor Hayes smiled at his wife, proud of everything she had accomplished, and grateful for every moment they had shared. Their story was not over. There would be more challenges, more adventures, more quiet evenings on the porch, watching the sunset. But whatever came next, they would face it together. Because that was what love meant. Across any distance, across any species, across all the stars in the galaxy. Together, always.